Hello, welcome back to Scripture Central. I'm Lynne Hilton Wilson.
I'm Jack Welch.
And we're excited to talk about the book of Alma today. We're in chapters 43 to 52. It's an 8-year span from the 18th year of the reign of the judges to the 25th. It's a very important time.
It's a crucial time, and there are several major stakes that we confront here in this book of Alma. It's a long book, and we hope you won't get weary as you read through it. As you try to get a handle on the big picture of the book of Alma, you might wonder, why does the book of Alma go all the way through chapter 63?
Because Helaman's the one who's writing here.
Moroni, we are Mormon. We have lots of different people who are speaking. But there's something I think really important that ties the whole book of Alma together. And you remember the book of Alma started with the problem of establishing the reign of judges and the challenge that came with Nahor. And the big question, I think, in the book of Alma is, will the reign of judges survive? And Helaman, of course, will be the successor to Alma.
His son.
But they don't know whether Alma is coming back or not.
That's chapter 45.
I think for a while they are wondering, well, maybe he will come. And if he does, then he will continue as the high priest.
Understood.
So in a way, I believe all the way till the time that the book of Alma ends, Helaman is the acting high priest, acting on behalf of his father, because they don't know that he is dead or gone or whatever. And so we have that thread holding the book of Alma together. But then we also have the question of all these challenges to the reign of judges. The Zoramites will become a major factor. And you remember what it was that the Zoramites get so upset about? Well, it's because Alma has taken the poor Zoramites and moved them over to the land of Jershon, where they become then associated with the Ammonites.
They want to bury their weapons of war. They want to live the teachings that are going to lead them closer to Christ.
And in response to that, the Zoramites in Antionum will go and create an alliance with the Lamanites.
That's right where we are.
And the Lamanites, of course, have the same complaint that the Nephites have taken some of their people, the Ammonites. So that, I think, helps to give
the political overview.
They aren't just squabbling. There are major stakes here, as usually is the case in campaigns that last this long.
During these 5 years, we have 8 battles or wars that are emphasized. And I'm fascinated that the emphasis, though, is not on the battle. The longest battles aren't even mentioned. It just says this lasted a long time. What's mentioned is the relationship to seeing God's hand, to see the miracles, to see the blessings that God inspired his leaders with developments and strategies. We see God's hand here more than we see the actual battlefield.
And Lynne, you're absolutely right that what we see here so often is the hand of God directing the traffic and causing blessings. And I think that's why Mormon especially would have left all this material in the Book of Mormon.
I think he's crafted it. He's carefully put the letters together. He's put the different conversations together. Yeah,
But he also understands the military strategy.
Of course, yes.
and he understands,
he's a general himself.
What it takes to organize and win battles. And he looks back at this time and is amazed that they were able to win as they did, but it was because the Lord blessed them. But remember that there are 2 purposes that are stated in the title page. One is, of course, that the Jew and Gentile and everyone will know that Jesus is the Christ. But there's another purpose, and that is that the remnants of the Lamanites will know what great things the Lord has done for their ancestors and that they are not cast off.
So these chapters are fulfilling that.
You can see how in these chapters, God's hand is protecting especially the Ammonite converts. They are Lamanites. And this freedom of religion and the need for them to be protected so that they will survive. And with that, we will, in the book of Helaman, we will see Samuel the Lamanite and other Lamanites who were prominent and more righteous than the Nephites. So that purpose that Mormon wants to show, yes, we've fought battles with the Lamanites, but our purpose here is to show that they are not cast off.
And most of that will be in next week. The Ammonites and the stripling warriors are all next week. But this week, I've made a little chart here to show these chapters in Alma, 43 to 52, and the years. We've got 2 years in the 18th year of the reign of the judge, and that's basically this dissenting group of Zerahemnah. And he is defeated and goes back to the Lamanites. Then we've got several chapters in the 19th year of the reign of the judges, 4 years that talk about Alma passing the plates to his son. And Jack's already mentioned, we don't know exactly where Alma went. I think he was translated, but we'll find out in heaven.
Yeah, and we may know that, but they didn't. They speculated about it.
They speculated, yeah.
And even if he was translated, he could maybe come back and visit them.
Of course. Yeah,
So-
no, I totally agree.
So there's
yeah.
still that open-ended aspect to that.
And then chapter 46, we're introduced to the new captain of the Nephite military, Moroni. Amalickiah then becomes the king of the Lamanites, and we learn about all of his murder and intrigue in chapters 47, 48, 49. And then we finish up this week with the change of power between Nephi, and his son Pahoran, and then, unfortunately, a internal battle between the kingmen of the Nephites who want to change the law. They don't want to have the reign of the judges continue. They want to go back, and that's taken to the people, and we vote. So that's sort of an overview. The problem with that little internal schism, this little civil war issue, is that it then leads to a second Lamanite war. And that's where we end, is right at the beginning of that war with Amalickiah, the second Amalickiah.
And we do call it a Lamanite war, but remember that the leaders are these Zoramites,
The dissent.
who are the dissenters, and they go and they then marshal all of the Lamanite warriors, and they put them in as leaders and chief captains, but it's the Zoramites who are still upset about what has happened there in the land of Zerahemnah. So it's not unlike the kind of political divisions that we see in wars all the time. The people are looking for allies. They have their own interests mainly in mind. And so here you've got the Zoramites and the Lamanites and Nephites and Mulekites are also in this picture. So it's a complex world, and I think we can learn lessons in our world today from this as well. That if you are divided, you will be conquered. And you have to stay together as a people.
The extremists, the dissenters, it's detrimental.
I think Mormon wants to say this came perilously close to destroying the Nephite people, the reign of judges, and who would there have been just a couple generations later to greet the birth of Christ if this period of war had not been worked out finally by righteous and diligent people.
Well, let's dive into the text. Starting in chapter 42, verse 1. The sons of Alma did go forth among the people to declare the word unto them, and Alma also himself could not rest. I just love that. We had just finished reading about other missionary examples down low, and Alma sends his sons out, but this time he has to join him. They preached the word and the truth according to the spirit of prophecy and revelation. And they preached after the holy order of God by which they were called. I want to emphasize again that they do not hold the Aaronic priesthood. They hold the higher priesthood. This is referred to in the Book of Mormon as the holy order of God. We call it the Melchizedek priesthood, but I'm really touched by this constant reference that they are acting under God's power. They are acting under God's authority. And because of that, they have the gifts of the Spirit, the gift of revelation, the gift of prophecy. And this is a phrase that's not used in the Bible. This is a Book of Mormon phrase that's then repeated in the other modern revelation. But I just love the fact that when we act in God's name, doing God's work, we are given his gifts, whether we're men, women, or children.
Notice that this holy order of God is what Alma had preached in the city of Amalickiah, and explains this using Melchizedek as the archetype of the king priest who was righteous. So we have especially these sons of Alma, whom he has charged to speak following the holy order of the priesthood that they've been given, but also to speak with the spirit of revelation and prophecy and to preach the gospel.
I did a little looking at these three sons. It's sort of interesting to see where the sons are cited, where they go, because you remember a week or two ago, we had the lesson about the letters or the blessings that were given to the three sons. And now we see that Morianton did repent and he does follow through and that he received his father's counsel. We see Shiblon continuing to work on beside his brother Helaman. And I'm just thrilled to see that there's a lot of continuity in the text on these three brothers.
They're not far apart. We don't know where they actually are headquartered, but the temple there in Zerahemnah was probably their home base.
It sounds like it because that's where Alma goes to rest and before he goes out on another mission. I'm interested, as you mentioned, this overarching challenge that they have, their religious challenges turned into political challenges. And that's when we see in verse 4, the Zoramites become Lamanites. So it was a religious challenge, and now it's not.
Now, on this chart, you can see that there were lots of wars. We've given them names and a brief summary, but it does help as you're going through this complicated history to realize that there are many parts of this military era. And it lasts for several years. One of the wars will be a 7-year war. So we need to keep track of kind of who is where and what they're doing.
I like a map.
And I was going to suggest that's a great idea to make your own map, if you will, and just keep the main theaters of military conflict in mind. And recognize that sometimes we're south of Zerahemnah. Sometimes we're in Gideon, which is not too far from Zerahemnah.
Just across the River Sidon.
Yeah, and so when a battle is taking place in Gideon, that's on the doorstep of the capital city. Now, other places are up on the seacoast to the north, and they build new cities up there, Morianton. So put that on your map.
But the whole thing is very small. It's within a few days' journey to each city. It says that you can get from one city to the next in a day. So the whole thing, if we go back and remember that from the land of Nephi to the land of Zerahemnah, with children, with animals, was a 20-day walk. It's not a large space, but it's really helpful to figure out where things lie.
And I think as well from a military analysis point of view, sometimes these are little skirmishes that are just like at the beginning, where the battle is diffused fairly quickly and there's just that one confrontation. But then there will be other times when they're actually fighting simultaneously in two fronts, and at the end in 3 fronts. And of course, in World War experience, we learn that if you are fighting in multiple places, it's very difficult, especially in the ancient world, to fight 2 fronts.
In chapter 43, there are 7 different times where the author is writing down this important divine allegiance. They are not saying we are honoring Moses. They're not saying we're honoring the Nephite lands. They're saying we are honoring God. And in this verse, in chapter 43, verse 9, we read, to support their lands and their houses and their wives and their children, that they might preserve them from the hands of their enemies, and also that they might preserve their rights and their privileges, yea, also their liberty, that they might worship God. And then that's repeated 7 times in this chapter, in different ways, different words. But to me, this is something he wants us to get. They are not fighting because they want more power or authority. They're fighting only defensively and only to protect their families and their God.
And I think this number 7,
I know.
of course, would emphasize the holiness of this cause. And what they're fighting for is especially the right to worship the way they want to, their church, their religion, and their God. And so I hadn't counted those, but I think that there are little subtle differences between these statements, but it's very clear that they have a religious campaign commitment to supporting, which again is the essential elements of the reign of judges. That Alma's father and Alma the younger had set in place, and now we have that carried out once Alma is gone, who is there to defend this political and religious agenda? Well, as we mentioned, the people of Ammon, the Ammonites, were pacifists. They will let their sons go to war because they had not sworn an oath to go to war. And yes, they're not generic pacifists, and they do support, as we mentioned before, the efforts in the front.
That's chapter 43, verse 12.
The Nephites would not suffer that those Ammonites should be destroyed. Therefore, they gave them lands for their inheritance. This was the land of Jershon. And the people of Ammon did give unto the Nephites a large portion of their substance in support of their armies.
That's another reason why I don't think they're pacifists, is they're helping the other people defend them. They're paying for others to guard them and to protect them. But they don't stay in Jershon very long, because that's where the Zoramites are coming to get some of their people that also join.
And they'll have to be moved. Now remember that the covenant that they make is that their swords will not be stained by blood. And so they can do anything else that doesn't involve slaying.
Yeah.
And then in chapter 43, verse 17, this is the first time we hear of Captain Moroni. He took all the command and the government of their wars, and he was only 25 years old when he was appointed chief captain.
Now, it's interesting, Alexander the Great was about this age, and this was 200 years before in the ancient world, over in Greece, not necessarily here in the New World. But I'm fascinated that this is not an unheard of age to become the military captain. And doesn't Moroni himself, doesn't Mormon himself become captain at like 16?
Verses 23 to 24 go on to say, Moroni, also knowing of the prophecies of Alma, notice the prophecies that are important.
Alma is a prophet, and he is foretelling the future.
Not just the prophecies in that sense, but the words of the prophet. I think the word is broad enough to include the teachings and the covenants and prophecies about the coming of Christ. And knowing of these prophecies, he sent certain men unto him, desiring him that he should inquire of the Lord. Moroni knows that Alma has a prophetic gift.
And as a good military leader, he goes to the prophet to ask for guidance. I think it's brilliant.
And Alma, who knows that area where they were fighting down in the land of Manti, he also can give not just an inspired answer, but he probably also would have understood the logistics of this place. And he gives not only the place, but the timing. So the word of the Lord comes unto Alma that the Lamanites were now marching toward Manti.
So that's the headwaters of the River Sidon.
Alma had been there himself. After they leave Amalickiah, that's where he goes.
This battle there is very short-lived. It's
That's
a
right.
few days, maybe possibly a few weeks.
There's no great military purpose.
No, because they're frightened. The Zoramite War is totally overwhelmed by the fact that Moroni has prepared so well. In verse 35, the Lamanites had passed the hill Riplah and came to the valley, and they began to cross the river Sidon. But as they are crossing the river Sidon, unfortunately, they're met on the backside by someone else.
And what does verse 49 tell us? They cried with one voice unto the Lord their God for their liberty and their freedom from bondage, and they began to stand against the Lamanites with power. In that selfsame hour that they cried unto the Lord for their freedom, the Lamanites began to flee before them.
So do you see what I was mentioning before? The emphasis of the author is that God's hand is in this. God is protecting them. The other thing that the author brings up in these chapters 43 here is the number, and that the dissenters are almost as many as the loyalists. Isn't that amazing? And then we have the Lamanites twice as numerous as the Nephites. So I think the author is trying to say, we are in a numerical disadvantage. It reminds me back, as you were talking about the Old Testament, it reminded me of the battle of when Joshua first comes over. They're completely outnumbered. Gideon's completely outnumbered. But the Lord can bring about his purposes. The Lord does not need numerical strength. Chapter 44 continues on with these few weeks, these few days of battle. When Moroni sees that the Lamanites, or the dissenting Zoramites, are frightened, he stops the fight and says, let's make a covenant, lay down your arms, and you can go. Well, it's interesting because their leader, Zerahemnah, is willing to lay down his military warfare but he's not willing to make the oath. And I am just blown away by this. He takes it so seriously. He picks up his sword, and that's when the servant of Moroni steps in, won't let him kill Moroni, completely knocks the sword out of his hand, breaks the sword, and scalps him. This was one phenomenal swordsman. And I looked into some of the history of scalping. You don't have to take off the entire layer of skin and dermis, but just even a portion of it is still scalping. And
the cutting of the hair. You remember Samson would not cut his hair.
Well, that was because of the Nazirite law.
That's right. But still, it's related to that when you go to battle, your long hair, it is a masculine manifestation of strength and power. And so when his hair is cut off, that's getting pretty close to killing him.
And Zerahemnah retreats, and the battle basically only lasts a few more, very short period of time. But these military oaths that the Nephites and Lamanites took so seriously, I think the Book of Mormon mentions not only oaths of loyalty for the troops, but oaths for surrender. And then their war treaties are oaths, and they're not negotiable. And you'll see this throughout the military chapters.
And what does Zerahemnah promise? That he would covenant and his people also with them, that if they would spare the remainder of their lives, they would never come again to war against the Nephites.
And that oath's important as we go to the next war in a few more chapters.
And that's, again, what we've been emphasizing is that these are really not the Lamanites who have a complaint against the Nephites. These are the dissenters within the land of Zerahemnah themselves, and particularly the Zoramites.
I'm fascinated also, as you just look down a couple more verses to verse 22, that the river Sidon is swift enough that they can put the bodies there. Now, we learned back earlier that the river Sidon was fordable, that they were able to walk across it, that the military went from one side of it to the other side of it. And we learned that the children of Ammon are able to move from Jershon over to Manti. They're able to walk across. But read verse 22 for me, Jack. This is just fascinating.
Now, verse 22, they did cast their dead into the waters of Sidon, and they have gone forth and are buried in the depths of the sea.
And thus ends the war. We're told in verse 24, thus ended the 18th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, and thus ended the record of Alma, which was written upon the plates of Nephi. We go to chapter 45.
And in chapter 45, we have now an interview between Alma and his sons. And it's really kind of like a stake president's interview or a bishop's interview, asking them, do you believe, and are you keeping your faith, and are you obeying the commandments and things like that? It's kind of Alma's farewell. Now, it's interesting that Alma's record doesn't include that interview.
No, Alma's record stops at 44, and then this is 45. So this is his son, including those 3 questions that he's asked about Christ.
And why do you think Helaman would want to include that at the beginning of his part of this record?
Well, one of the questions is, will you take care of the plates? And do you believe in God? He's showing that he is willing to carry out the work of God. But I'm fascinated, Jack, just as a literary device, the difference between the first 44 chapters in Alma are filled with chiasmus. I think I told you I almost found one per chapter, at least. And most of them were much larger. Beautiful. Alma 36, of course, is our best. But we completely see a change in the authorship. Now, in English, you may not catch it unless you're really looking at this with computers and stylometry. But I've got a chart here that I'd love to show you about looking at Alma's words. And when we just look at Alma's words, whether they're in the same context of his letters or in the same context of his sermons or narrative, there is continuity between the authorship. But when we look at Alma versus someone like Nephi, who also wrote a lot, the statistics show that they are different authors. And I see, as soon as we jump over to Helaman, we see a different author. And it's just what the book claims to be, an ancient text with multiple authors.
And, this chart, which has been published long ago, is one of our first efforts back in the 1980s, thanks to John Hilton's work, to just say, well, we have a big block of Nephi words. We have big blocks of Alma's words. We have enough that we can compare those writers with Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery and other known writers.
In that day, they used 5,000 word segments,
That's
and
right.
they'd put them in a computer with lots of studies.
And as the chart shows, you do get separation, and especially when you get down to comparing Solomon Spaulding with Nephi and Alma.
He's one of those who was claimed to possibly have been the author of the book because he wrote something similar.
The technology of stylometry developed and is now at a point where we don't need to have 5,000 word samples to compare. The computer with supercomputer capability can actually produce separation between different authors with as few as a couple hundred words. And what this means is the latest studies are able to find at least 27, maybe 28 different authors writing in the Book of Mormon.
How about the letters?
The letters, yes, some of these letters. We have letters here.
From Moroni and from Amaron.
In the Book of Alma especially, we have a variety of authors where going forward now we will have a report from Helaman, and that's 3 chapters long. And like you say, there are other letters that are written, especially Moroni's and Pahoran's. They're exchanging, first of all, Moroni's anger and Pahoran's calm responses. But we also see here very clearly distinct verbal differences. It's almost like a fingerprint. You know, the fingerprints they're all different. But if you don't know the subtle differences, they may all look the same. So in reading the Book of Alma, take it seriously when we get a cue that we are now shifting from one voice to another.
I want to start in chapter 45, verse 1, because I'm so touched that they celebrate their victory by fasting, by praying, by worshiping.
Yeah, that is really interesting that they are so pleased that they have been delivered, and obviously it's been a miraculous divine deliverance. And it says that they gave thanks unto the Lord their God, and they did fast much, and pray also, and they did worship God with exceeding great joy. Now, the joy can also refer to the kind of celebration and shouting Hosanna and not just feeling happy, but the fasting. They would want to appear before God in a pure state. And when you fast, you deprive yourself of food that you normally would eat. But in the process, you recognize even more your dependence upon God.
But that's how they approach the war, and that's what is emphasized by the author. They're not emphasizing the battle as much as they are God's intervention. But in verses 9 to 14, we then move on to Alma's prophecy of the future extinction.
So after Alma had asked Helaman, "Believest thou in Jesus Christ who shall come?" And he said, "Yea, I believe all the words you have spoken." And then Alma says unto him, "Blessed art thou, and the Lord shall prosper thee in this land." He knows, of course, that there was a 600-year prophecy
That Christ would come in 600 years after Lehi left
from
Jerusalem.
Nephi's time. And now he says, "I perceive that this very people, the Nephites, according to the spirit of revelation which is in me, in 400 years from the time that Jesus shall manifest himself, shall dwindle in unbelief." So it's not going to be the case that Jesus will come and everything will, the millennial day will arrive. He's now informing him that on this, there's the 600-year prophecy when Jesus will come, and then 400 years after Jesus come, then you'll have a complete 1,000-year period, and at that point, they will dwindle in unbelief.
Well, the extinction is mentioned as well.
That's right. And the 400 years is 20 times 20. And in the Mayan calendar, a tun is 20 years. And so this would be 20 tuns. And that makes sense. We would think more in terms of centuries and decades, but they would think in terms of 20-year cycles.
And then Alma leaves, and we don't know exactly where he went. He's taken up by this. I think there's another interesting point, but you have to go back to the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon to see this one. In verse 22 of chapter 45, we have a different pen. Everything else is in Oliver Cowdery's handwriting up to this point, but the quill has a different penmanship here for just 28 words, and it matches Joseph Smith's. So there was one point when Joseph is doing the scribe work. We don't know what else was going on, but it's just this tiny little place. It's the only place in the Book of Mormon. It's right here. That at least this is the only place we have, and what we have is the small portion of the original manuscript that still exists.
So do you think that Oliver needed to take a break?
Maybe.
And it may have been that Joseph had just seen and read the words that needed to be written down.
And he wanted to keep going.
Oliver said, "Excuse me, I'll be right back." And Joseph says, "Well, leave me the pen." And he writes these words. And I think it's interesting. "Yea, in every city throughout all the land which was possessed by the people of Nephi, it came to pass that they did appoint priests and teachers."
Yes, it is interesting that those are the words. The gospel continued to be taught. Life continued to go on during these periods of time. It was very important that they maintain their relationship with God.
And I think the priesthood that Joseph Smith restores is something that he realizes is very important.
All of God's people.
Now, the priesthood had not yet been restored to him. That will come a little later when they're translating 3rd Nephi. But he already understands the importance of having priests and teachers.
Right.
And I think as he saw this, maybe he said, "I don't want to lose this."
And I think that's important because he comes from a period of time where priesthood was sort of disregarded. The Puritans and the Protestants did not seek for the priesthood, and yet Joseph Smith is being line upon line introduced to this need of God's power.
So in chapter 46, we now have a civil war that is led by Amalickiah. And Moroni needs now to gather faithful people, and he does this by hoisting up on a pole the torn coat that he had been wearing. He takes his coat, he tears it, and he writes upon it these words that we've seen before, the purposes and the reasons for which they are fighting. And the people then come running. And you might wonder, why would they come running just because Moroni has put a pole up there? Because they come with their weapons. They're ready to go to battle. There's an interesting little account by a Catholic scholar named Roland DeVoe, who spent a lot of time in Israel right after World War II and went around trying to understand the people of the land. And he and some other people were actually out surveying, taking a sighting picket, and then they were measuring the height of certain hills and things in the area where this had never been done before. And as they got up to the top of the hill and put their sighting picket up, all of a sudden, the village down below, all the men came running up to the top of the hill with their swords and their guns.
Oh my!
And at first they were shocked, saying, "Oh, no, we're friendly. Don't attack us." And they said, "No. Where's the battle?"
So that was a sign of a battle.
Putting up the picket, putting up the pole,
or a flag, what we would call now.
Yes, and the Romans, of course, also used these poles for rallying around the pole. Each century had its own pole. And so Alma uses, and apparently in ancient times, you have to have something that is known by all the soldiers. And this is not a professional military.
No.
They're all people who live at home. And how do you call them to war?
Captain Moroni pulls it out.
He does.
And the words are a little bit different. Verse 12 reads, "In memory of our God, our religion, our freedom, and our peace, our wives and our children." And that's what he fastens to the pole.
And so what they're fighting for is, of course, their religious freedom. And this passage in Alma 46 is taken today by the church and by our leaders. President Oakes especially has spoken internationally on freedom of religion and the importance of using all of our resources to strengthen and defend our right to worship the way we want. Moroni knows that if these dissenters win, the temple in Zerahemnah will be disbanded. The priests and the teachers in that area will not have any authority to continue to preach what they are doing. The covenants will not be kept. And this is a crucial matter. And so when they fight and put up, we will fight for our freedom. And they even call this the title of liberty.
But he includes, in addition to their freedom, they're fighting for their families, Jack, their wives and their children. They're fighting to protect their families.
I think that's important. What you say, again, is the motivation. What really matters here, God and family. They're not fighting for their businesses. They're not fighting for international trade.
No, and they're not even fighting offensively. It's all defensive warfare to defend their families and their religion.
Moroni then speaks to all the people who are there. And he says in verse 18, "Surely God shall not suffer that we, who are despised because we take upon us the name of Christ, shall be trodden down and destroyed, until we bring it upon us by our own transgression."
What else do you like about chapter 46, Jack?
Well, I like the words that in verse 20, "If you are going to maintain this title upon this land, let them come forth and enter into a covenant that they will maintain their rights and their religion." So they all come forth one at a time. And what they say in verse 22, "We covenant with our God that we shall be destroyed, even as our brethren in the land northward," meaning the Jaredites. "Yea, he may cast us at the feet of our enemies, even as we have cast our garments at thy feet to be trodden under foot, if we shall fall into transgression." Now, what's going on here is they're taking their garments off, and then they're all stomping on them. And it is a symbol that this will happen to us if we do not keep this covenant. Now, there's a book that, let me mention because it's so pertinent to almost everything we're saying and finding in these chapters. It's called Warfare in the Book of Mormon. And this book was published back in 1990, so some time ago. And in it, there are lots of very interesting details about what ancient warfare was like. And it covers things like the organization of troops, their weapons, fortifications, the timing of war, the ideology of war, the role of God in the war.
And I was fascinated to read in this text that 11 times the title of liberty is used to rally the people in the text. That may have happened more or less, but that's a lot more than I had realized unless I had looked at this compilation.
What I find interesting here is that we actually have from the Hittite world examples of oaths that were sworn by soldiers. Now we know that Uriah the Hittite was in King David's army.
He was one of his mighty men.
Yes, and maybe they used this same pattern. And let me read to you two of the texts that tell us what the Hittites did to put their soldiers under oath. "Then he places wax and mutton fat in their hands. He throws them on a flame and says, 'Just as this wax melts, and just as the mutton fat dissolves, whoever breaks these oaths shows disrespect to the king of Haiti, the Hittites. Let him melt like wax. Let him dissolve like mutton fat.' And the men declare, 'So let it be.'"
Jack, that almost sounds like we're using a pattern.
But let me mention one other here, because it's not just the commander-in-chief that's doing this. This is also a religious function. And the next text, which comes from a Hittite tablet, says, "He, the priest, presents to them we don't know what it says, but he presents to them the language. Before their eyes, he throws it on the ground." So they've got their text, they've signed it, and he throws it, maybe it's a clay tablet, most likely. They throw that on the ground, and they trample it underfoot. And he speaks as follows, "Whoever breaks these oaths, even so let the Hittite people come and trample that man's town underfoot." So his home, his family, his people.
There's a lot of parallels between what we just read in chapter 46 with Moroni's oath.
Now, that's just one little example, page after page of very interesting details about ancient warfare that will bring many important points to light. Well, this chapter 46 ends with a brief skirmish where Amalickiah, who is a Zoramite, and he's now trying to attack Zerahemnah, he's defeated fairly quickly. The loyalty and the response of the Nephite soldiers was overwhelming. And so Amalickiah, he takes off.
And he goes to the Lamanites, and that's chapter 47. And through deception and murder, he is able to, I can't believe how fast he does this turnaround. But chapter 47 describes how he becomes the king of the Lamanites. Verse 1 says that he went up to the land of Nephi among the Lamanites and did stir up the Lamanites to anger against the people of Nephi. But the crazy thing is, to me, the Lamanites do not want to break their covenant. And so he says, let's compel them to arms. Let's make them fight. And he just does not, they do not want to do it. And it actually causes a split. We have, the people that say we will not break our oath, and they're the dissenters of the Lamanites under the leadership of Lehontai. And he takes some of the people away, whereas the king of the Lamanites and Amalickiah are trying, by fraud, to get their people stirred up to go to battle again.
And of course, this land of Nephi is the land where the four sons of Mosiah had been so successful in their missionary work. So there were righteous people among the Lamanites. And remember what we said about the way in which these chapters will help the Lamanites and their descendants to understand that they were righteous and that the Lord has blessed them. Here's an example of that, where you have a Zoramite coming over and now trying to mobilize forces for his personal gain. And the Lamanites resist that.
But unfortunately, Lehontai, after Amalickiah is trying to connive his way by fraud into the hearts of the people, he then has him poisoned and has him killed so that he has a larger group. And then, of course, he arranges to kill the king himself so that he can become the king. But I love the statement by the queen. Let's look at verses 32 to 35. The queen begs him, would you please spare the people? I admire that she's willing to stand up and have a voice. Now, I don't know the relationship between men and women in that day and age. It doesn't sound like she had a lot of choice except for welcoming him. So she pleads for her people.
And she could have been killed.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
But why do you think Amalickiah doesn't kill her?
He is still acting by fraud, wanting to gain the majority of the people. And so he becomes, they marry. He takes the queen.
What does he tell the people, how the king had died?
Oh, well, that's the crazy part. He asks his servant who had stabbed him to come and tell the queen that it was the king's servants, not his servant.
Correct. So again, the fraud was perpetrated in a very dishonest way. But the queen, she at first anyway would have assumed that Amalickiah was a friendly person, and he offers an alliance with her.
And he pretends to defend her husband, the past king. Right. He pretends to be mourning.
A queen would need in that world a king. So having that offer, you can see why would have been reasonable for her to have accepted that.
In verse 36, we read about these dissenters, and it says that not long after their dissension, they become more hardened and impenitent, and more wild, wicked, ferocious than the Lamanites, entirely forgetting the Lord their God. And this becomes a theme of the rest of the war chapters. It's emphasized before as well that if we have had the Spirit of God in our lives and we have been taught the truth and we leave, it is harder. Satan has a stronger hold. And I take it back to Lehi's opposition in all things. I don't know exactly why this is the case, but the author wanted to emphasize this here.
So in chapter 48, we now have Amalickiah, the Zoramite, with his Lamanite forces, and he decides, now it's my time to take Zerahemnah. And so he launches maybe a surprise attack on Zerahemnah. And he comes forward.
Actually, he doesn't come. He sends his captains. He stays back, I think, to make peace with the queen or whatever, but it's still his war. He's the one who's sending him out.
That's right. It's his war, but he's not a trained soldier. But he will go, and he's always there, of course, as the leader from the rear, or sometimes he'll come out in the front later.
Yeah, but not in this war. He lost the last one, and he's not going to come up this time.
And Captain Moroni will defend Zerahemnah. And it's Moroni's faith in Christ that will allow him to win. And in chapter 48, verse 13, we have another use of the word Christ, saying that Moroni was firm in the faith of Christ and swore an oath to defend his people. So as the leader, we know what his motives are. Now, chapter 49 begins with a little aside where down in the south of in the land of Zerahemnah was the city of Amalickiah. And it had been an important and a strategic place. The Nahorites had gone there, and it's kind of a midpoint between the Lamanites and the Nephites, and so it would make sense for the Nephites to want to be sure that the Lamanites can't take that place. Now, the city of Amalickiah had been destroyed, and back in Alma chapter 16, it tells us that it was in the 11th year of the reign of Judges.
And now we're in the 19th.
And there are only a few places in the whole Book of Mormon where we have day, month, and year for a certain event.
I counted them up. There's 10, but here in chapter 49, verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass in the 11th month, in the 19th year, on the 10th day." We get an exact date.
And it is now in the 19th year, so forget the months and days. It's important for them,
It's been 8 years.
but they want us to know that it's precise. But it's been more than 7 years.
Why is that significant?
We know from some ancient texts that when a city in the ancient world was destroyed and lots of people were dead and they weren't given proper burials, and you remember in Amalickiah, they heaped all of the bodies into a great heap and went away.
It was called something like
The desolation of Nahors.
That's right, yeah.
The land is now contaminated with corpse impurity. And again, under the law of Moses,
That's the 7 years?
there is a 7-year cleansing period.
Awesome.
And we have a couple cases. One of them was on the island of Cyprus, where a town had been destroyed. And after 7 years, a proclamation said people can now move back into that area if they want.
And this is what we see here in the Book of Mormon, these ancient rules coming to pass right here in chapter 49. Wow. Wow.
They wanted to call attention to this.
Yeah.
And it's not just that it was 8 years, but precisely.
Exactly.
In the meantime, Amalickiah makes an oath to drink Moroni's blood, right? That's in chapter 49, verse 27. Now, what kind of an oath is that? Now, of course, he wants to kill Moroni. He's really mad. I mean, Moroni has defeated his effort to try to come and conquer Zerahemnah. But this oath that Amalickiah is taking, you don't eat blood. This is not kosher. You can't eat a drop of blood under Mosaic law. And so saying that he will drink Moroni's blood, this is as much of a threat to the law of Moses and the religion of the people as you can imagine. It's so I thought that was worth a quick note. Meanwhile, in chapter 50,
We have periods of peace, 4 years.
for these 5 years, from the 20 to the 24th year of reign of Judges, they're all preparing. You know, they're rebuilding Amalickiah. They become rich, it says. They build cities, the cities of Moroni, Aaron, Nephiah. The faithful were delivered. And in chapter 50, verse 23, it says, "Never was there a happier time."
And I think it's in part because the people could feel safe. They didn't have to constantly be under the fear of death. He describes some of these towers interestingly. I'm going to start in chapter 50, verse 1. Moroni did not stop making preparations, digging up heaps of earth around about all the cities. Upon the tops of these ridges of earth, he caused that there should be timbers the height of a man, and then he builds towers. And the reason why I think this is so interesting is because I just finished reading my latest National Geographic, where they've done, they started these LIDAR studies down in Central America in 2018 and 2020, and they just finished another one in 2024, and it was published saying that these cities that are close enough that you can get to see each other within a day's journey have these huge mounds and you can't access the city except for through one pass. And that as they dug up the mounds, they've left a moat around the city. Well, it sounds like it's describing Moroni's efforts, but it's now in the archaeological record that they're trying to see from the time period that exactly ties to this. It's the 1st century BC.
And there is a chart in Charting the Book of Mormon that lists all of periods of fortification in Mesoamerican archaeology. Certain centuries, we don't see much fortification work going on, but in the 1st century BC, this time period is one of the largest times that fortifications appear. Also, in the 3rd and 4th century, when Moroni will be fighting, there are lots of fortifications that show up.
Not our Captain Moroni, but after. Yeah, after the destruction of the laymen.
So the archaeological record, when you see the timing of the building of these fortifications, corresponds fairly closely to the periods in the Book of Mormon.
Just more evidence.
When we have intense warfare. Well, as they are doing all of this fortification, the Lamanites, of course, under Amalickiah's lead, are planning a major campaign. Yes. And it's going to be an all-out return so that he can drink the blood of Moroni. They're equipping themselves. They are preparing, just as the Nephites are preparing for defense. The Lamanites are gearing up.
In fact, verse 19 and 20 talks about the purpose of these war chapters. They're to show God's hand. And he actually quotes Lehi when he does it. One of these new cities up the East Sea coast is the city of Lehi. And it's right next to another city of Morianton. But Morianton, unfortunately, thinks that the people of Lehi are a little too close. He wants more property. And so he starts a little battle between these two neighbors. These two new Nephite towns are fighting against each other. Well, unfortunately, Morianton is a wicked man. He gets mad. He beats his poor maidservant. She runs over and tells Moroni's people, and we have to stop another civil battle between the Nephites. They're getting upset at each other. That is stopped at the same time Zerahemnah is preparing to come to battle with the Lamanites.
And Moroni will send troops to stop them. So now he's sending them out to the northeast. And Teancum, the leader, and this is the first time we hear about Teancum, but he goes in through a narrow pass by the sea, and this leads up to the land northward, and he is able to slay Morianton. And so it's interesting that we'll see Teancum. He will kill 3 people in this way, one-on-one combat of some kind. And with that, peace is restored there.
Except we do have a change of government again.
That's right. Nephihah dies.
Yeah. And so his son
Pahoran
is voted in by the people. It's a very different kind of system of judges than we have. It's more like the Old Testament, isn't it? Where the judges are usually for life, and it's often through families.
But the voice of the people sustains them. Yeah. And so you have to get the confirmation of that.
But when we have a political change, we often have military skirmishes. People are upset. Everyone's not always happy with the outcome.
That's almost always the case, that when you have a change of government, then there's a moment of opportunity for whether it's a political initiative or military, and especially in the ancient world where the new king doesn't really know what he's doing very much yet, and so it's a vulnerable point. And that's what happens next as we have the Lamanites now beginning to attack, and in chapters 51 and 52, we have what we call the beginning of the Second Amalekiah War.
So this Amalekite War lasts 7 years, and we'd like to talk about it in one setting. So we'll talk about these 2 chapters in our next video. Please join us then to see the strength that God's hand can have as we are striving to do his work.
As we go through these chapters, we can learn a lot of personal lessons about loyalty and about faithfulness to God and belief in Christ and knowing that he is in the details of our lives. We have a responsibility in all of this to prepare. And Moroni, he did prepare. His preparations involved not only fortifications that he built, but armor. And he was able to clothe his soldiers in new kinds of weapons and armor that was would be successful.
Jack, I think he was inspired to do that. Moroni and Mormon both state all that is good comes of God. And I think that Moroni is actually inspired by God in his efforts to do that.
And Hugh Nibley said Moroni was unconventional. And it's true that he doesn't just fight the old normal way. Nibley himself, of course, knew a lot about military, and he said all military geniuses are not conventional. So we have enough being told to us here that Mormon recognizes the not just the inspiration, which of course is motivating Moroni, but he's also bringing every talent to bear that he can. And he prepares in advance. And I'd like to testify of the importance of our preparation in our own life, that if we don't prepare, if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail, as a nice little chiasm. We have been blessed with roadmaps of life. We have the plan of salvation. And as we prepare to meet the problems that will inevitably come to us, there will be difficulties. Just ask Moroni. These Nephites knew that life was not simple. But because they were prepared and had faith in Jesus Christ, they prevailed. And I testify that that's the formula for us today, too. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.